The great crystalline spires of Valtherus stretched toward the twin suns, their surfaces reflecting the morning light in prismatic cascades that painted the royal gardens in shifting rainbows. Queen Lysandra stood at the observation deck of the highest tower, her forearms clasped behind her back as she gazed across the capital city of her empire. The Valtheri were an ancient race, their civilization spanning millennia, their technology advanced beyond measure. Yet for all their progress, they had never encountered anything quite like the small vessel that now approached their homeworld. The ship was crewed by Valtheri standards, its hull scarred by countless journeys through the void. It bore no imperial markings, no identification that would place it among the known vessels of the galaxy. Most disturbing of all, it had appeared without warning at the edge of their system, somehow bypassing every sensor array and defensive station that protected their world. "My queen," came a voice from behind her. Admiral Kethvar approached with measured steps, his ceremonial armor gleaming. "The unknown vessel continues its approach. Our scans indicate it carries only 3 life forms. Should we intercept?" Lysandra's primary eyes remained fixed on the horizon while her secondary pair turned to regard the admiral. Her people's ability to track multiple focal points simultaneously had served them well in their rise to galactic prominence. "Have they responded to our communications?" "They have, Your Majesty." The message was unusual. They claim to carry a member of the royal family who has been lost for 23 years. "They request an audience with you personally." The Queen's 4 hands clenched involuntarily. 23 years. The number sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the morning air. 23 years since her eldest daughter, Princess Zaralyn, had vanished during a diplomatic mission to the Outer Rim. 23 years of searching, of following false leads, of slowly accepting that her child was gone forever. "Impossible," she whispered, but, even as she spoke the word, something deep within her chest began to flutter with a hope she had long since buried. "The transmission included biometric data, Your Majesty. Our analysts are comparing it to Princess Zaralyn's records now." Before the admiral could finish his sentence, Lysandra was already moving toward the communication center. Her long stride carried her through the corridors of the palace with practiced efficiency, servants and nobles stepping aside with deep bows as she passed. The clicking of her clawed feet on the polished stone floor echoed through the halls like a countdown. The communication center was a marvel of Valtheri engineering, its walls lined with displays showing data streams from across the empire. Technicians worked at crystalline interfaces, their hands moving in complex patterns as they manipulated information with thought-controlled systems. At the center of it all stood Chief Analyst Vorthem, his expression troubled as he reviewed the incoming data. "Your Majesty," he said without turning from his display, "the biometric analysis is conclusive. The DNA signature matches Princess Zaralyn with 99.97% certainty. But there are anomalies." "What kind of anomalies?" Lysandra's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience, but beneath it lay the tremor of a mother's desperate hope. The cellular degradation patterns suggest prolonged exposure to unfiltered cosmic radiation. Her bone density has decreased significantly, consistent with extended periods in low gravity. Most concerning, there are trace elements in her system that our computers cannot identify. They appear to be organic compounds of unknown origin. The Queen studied the biometric readout, her 4 hands dancing across the control interface as she pulled up additional data. The image that slowly resolved on the main screen made her breath catch in her throat. Even after 23 years, even changed by whatever hardships she had endured, the face was unmistakably that of her daughter. But Zaralyn was not alone. Flanking her in the image were 2 smaller figures, beings unlike anything in the Valtheri databases. They appeared to be children, perhaps 12 or 13 years of age by their proportions. Their skin was pale, almost luminescent, with no trace of the metallic sheen that characterized all known sentient species. Most unusual of all were their eyes, not the compound structures common to advanced life, but simple, single-lens organs that seemed to hold in startling depth of intelligence. "Who are they?" Lysandra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Unknown, Your Majesty. The ship's manifest lists them as dependents, but provides no species classification. The only identifier given is human." The word hung in the air like a foreign curse. In all the vast databases of the Galactic Council, among the thousands of known species that populated the void between stars, there was no record of anything called human. "Grant them permission to land," Lysandra commanded. "Full diplomatic protocols. I want every security measure in place, but they are to be treated as honored guests until proven otherwise." As the unknown ship descended through Valthera's atmosphere, crowds began to gather in the streets below. Word spread quickly through the capital that something unprecedented was happening. The royal family had not received an unscheduled diplomatic visit in over a century, and the sight of the strange vessel had sparked curiosity and concern in equal measure. The ship touched down in the primary landing bay of the royal complex, its landing engines kicking up clouds of steam as they powered down. The bay was surrounded by the Queen's personal guard, their energy weapons held at ready but pointed toward the ground in a show of cautious respect. Medical teams stood by, along with xenobiologists and linguists prepared for first contact protocols. The ship's airlock hissed open, and a ramp extended to touch the polished floor of the landing bay. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, slowly, a figure appeared in the doorway. Princess Zaralyn looked older than her 42 years. Her once pristine scales now bore scars and had faded to a dull silver gray. Her royal robes had been replaced by practical clothing that looked like it had been mended many times. But her posture still carried the dignity of her bloodline, and when her eyes met those of her mother across the landing bay, 23 years of separation seemed to collapse into nothing. Behind her came the two children. They moved with a careful grace that spoke of long practice in unfamiliar environments, their strange single eyes darting around the bay with obvious curiosity but no trace of fear. The boy appeared slightly older than the girl, his dark hair falling across his forehead in a way that partially obscured his expression. The girl's hair was lighter, and she stayed close to Zaralyn's side with one small hand resting on the princess's arm. The queen stepped forward, her forearms spread wide in the traditional Valtheri greeting. "My daughter," she said, her voice carrying across the landing bay. "You have returned to us." Zaralyn descended the ramp with measured steps, the two children flanking her protectively. As she drew closer, the changes in her became more apparent. Her movements were subtly different, adapted to lower gravity and different atmospheric conditions. Her scales showed signs of repeated exposure to harsh radiation. Most telling of all were her eyes, they held knowledge of things that no Valtheri should have experienced. "Mother," Zaralyn replied, her voice hoarse with emotion. "I bring greetings from a distant star, and children who have known no home but the void between worlds." The formal greeting seemed inadequate for the moment, and, after a heartbeat of hesitation, both women moved forward into an embrace that sent murmurs through the watching crowd. The queen's forearms enfolded her daughter, 23 years of grief and hope pouring out in a single gesture. When they finally separated, Lysandra's attention turned to the two children who had waited patiently throughout the reunion. Up close, they were even more unusual than the long-range scans had suggested. Their skin had an almost translucent quality, and their movements suggested a bone structure that was both lighter and more flexible than any known species. Most remarkably, they seemed completely unintimidated by their surroundings, despite being surrounded by armed guards and alien technology. "Mother," Zaralyn said, placing one hand on each child's shoulder, "I would like you to meet my children. This is Thomas, and this is Sarah. They are human." The word sent another ripple of surprised whispers through the assembled crowd. The children stepped forward with remarkable poise for their apparent age, offering gestures that seemed to be their species' equivalent of a bow. "Your Majesty," the boy Thomas said in accented but perfectly understandable Valtheri, "we are honored to meet the mother of the woman who saved our world." The girl, Sarah, nodded in agreement. "We've heard so many stories about the great crystal cities and the people who live among the stars. Thank you for welcoming us here." Lysandra found herself momentarily speechless. Not only could these unknown beings speak their language, but they did so with a sophistication that suggested significant education. More than that, there was something in their manner that spoke of hardships faced and overcome, a maturity that seemed at odds with their youthful appearance. "The honor is mine," she replied, falling back on diplomatic protocols while her mind raced with questions. "Any children of my daughters are welcome in the halls of our ancestors." She gestured toward the palace complex beyond the landing bay. Come. There will be time for questions later, but, for now, you must be tired from your journey. We have prepared quarters for you in the family wing. As the group began moving toward the palace proper, Admiral Kefvar fell into step beside the Queen. Your Majesty, he said quietly, there are protocols for first contact situations. These beings should be quarantined for medical examination, their ship should be impounded for analysis, and, Admiral, Lysandra interrupted without slowing her pace, these are not first contact protocols. These are my grandchildren coming home. The words surprised her even as she spoke them. Grandchildren. She looked back at the two human children walking beside Zara Lynn, their strange single eyes taking in everything around them with obvious fascination. How had her daughter come to adopt children of an unknown species? What had happened during those 23 years of absence? And, most pressing of all, if these children had never known any home but the void between worlds, where exactly had Zara Lynn been all this time? The palace corridors seemed to stretch endlessly as they made their way toward the family quarters. Servants and nobles lined the path, all eager for a glimpse of the returned princess and her unusual companions. The children handled the attention with remarkable composure, acknowledging the stares and whispered comments without apparent discomfort. They adapt quickly, Zara Lynn said quietly, noticing her mother's observations. It's a survival trait of their species. Humans are remarkably adaptable. How many of them are there? Lysandra asked. These humans? Zara Lynn's expression grew somber. Not many. Not anymore. The family wing of the palace had not been occupied in decades. The Queen had closed it after Zara Lynn's disappearance, unable to bear the memories it contained. Now, as servants hurried to prepare rooms that had been sealed for over 2 decades, the wing seemed to come alive again. The quarters assigned to the children were adjacent to Zara Lynn's childhood rooms, and, as they settled in, Lysandra found herself studying them with growing fascination. Their belongings were sparse but carefully maintained, suggesting a life of constant travel. They moved with the efficient economy of those accustomed to limited space and resources. Your Majesty, Thomas said as servants finished arranging their few possessions, Zara Lynn has told us about the great libraries of your people. Would it be possible to see them while we're here? You can read Veil Fairy? Lysandra asked, surprised. Some, Sarah replied. Zara Lynn has been teaching us for years. We're especially interested in your historical records. The Queen exchanged a meaningful glance with her daughter. Children interested in historical records were unusual in any species. What kind of history interests you? Wars, Thomas said simply. Specifically, wars between technologically advanced civilizations and less developed ones. We want to understand how it usually ends. The casual way he spoke about such a dark topic sent a chill through Lysandra. These children had clearly seen things that no young being should have to witness. And, what have you concluded from your studies? That it depends, Sarah said, on whether the less developed civilization has something the advanced one needs, or whether they're just in the way. The Queen looked at her daughter, seeing something in Zara Lynn's expression that confirmed her growing suspicions. What aren't you telling me? Before Zara Lynn could answer, alarms began sounding throughout the palace complex. The deep, resonant tones indicated ships approaching the system, many ships, moving fast and without clearance. Admiral Kefvar's voice came through the communication system moments later. Your Majesty, please report to the command center immediately. We have multiple unknown vessels entering the system. They appear to be moving in attack formation. Lysandra felt her blood turn cold. In all her years as queen, Veilthera had never been directly threatened. Their system was too well defended, their military too powerful, their diplomatic relationships too carefully maintained. For someone to approach with hostile intent suggested either desperation or overwhelming confidence. How many ships? She called out to the communication system. Initial count suggests over 300 vessels, Your Majesty. Configuration unknown, but they're massive. Some of them appear to be larger than our battleships. Zara Lynn moved to stand beside her mother, the two children flanking her protectively. Mother, she said quietly, we need to talk. Now. Before they get here. Before who gets here? Lysandra demanded, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The ones who destroyed the human homeworld, Thomas said simply. The ones who have been hunting us across the galaxy for the past 7 years. The ones, Sarah added, who found us because we came here. The weight of realization hit Lysandra like a physical blow. Her daughter had not simply returned home after 23 years of wandering. She had led an enemy fleet directly to the heart of the Veilthari Empire. And that enemy was apparently powerful enough to pursue them across the galaxy and devastating enough to destroy entire worlds. We're sorry, Zara Lynn whispered, tears beginning to form in her compound eyes. We had nowhere else to go. No one else would help us. The alarms continued to sound as Lysandra looked at her daughter and the 2 human children who had somehow become her grandchildren. Whatever was coming, whatever choice had led to this moment, there was no turning back now. The Queen of the Veilthari Empire straightened her shoulders and felt the weight of decision settle upon her. Admiral, she called to the communication system, mobilize the fleet. Full defensive positions. And send word to the Galactic Council, we may need to call in some favors. She turned to face her daughter and the children. You're home now. And the Veilthari do not abandon family. Thomas and Sarah exchanged a glance that seemed far too adult for their apparent age. Your Majesty, Thomas said carefully, you should know that they've never been defeated. Not once, in over 1,000 years of conquest. Then, Lysandra replied with grim determination, it's time they learned what it means to threaten a mother's children. Outside the palace windows, the first enemy ships began to appear as dark spots against the starfield, growing larger with each passing moment. The fate of the Veilthari Empire, and perhaps the galaxy itself, now hung in the balance, all because a lost princess had finally come home. The command center of the royal palace had been transformed into a war room within minutes of the first alarm. Holographic displays showed the approaching enemy fleet in stark detail, their ships arranged in precise formation patterns that spoke of military discipline and overwhelming confidence. Queen Lysandra stood at the center of it all, her forearms moving across multiple control interfaces as she coordinated the defense of her empire. 347 vessels confirmed, Admiral Kethvar reported, his voice tight with barely controlled tension. The largest of them are easily twice the size of our dreadnoughts. We've never seen ship designs like these before. Princess Zaralyn moved to stand beside the main tactical display, her expression grim as she studied the enemy formation. Thomas and Sarah flanked her, their young faces serious as they watched the approaching fleet. Despite their age, they had insisted on remaining in the command center, claiming they might be able to provide useful intelligence about their pursuers. They're called the Hegemony, Zaralyn said quietly. The ships you're seeing are just their advance force. Their full fleet numbers in the tens of thousands. The command center fell silent except for the constant hum of processing systems and the distant sound of alarms throughout the palace complex. Admiral Kethvar was the first to speak. Tens of thousands? His voice carried a note of disbelief. That would represent a military force larger than the entire Galactic Council combined fleet. The Galactic Council has never faced anything like the Hegemony, Thomas said, his youthful voice carrying an authority that seemed at odds with his appearance. They don't conquer through negotiation or political pressure. They simply arrive, demand surrender, and destroy anyone who refuses. Sarah nodded in agreement. They've been expanding across this galaxy for over a millennium. Every species they encounter faces the same choice: submit or die. Queen Lysandra felt a chill run through her as she processed the implications. And the humans chose to die? We chose to fight, Thomas corrected. For 7 years, we held them back through guerrilla warfare and hit-and-run tactics. But, in the end, they had too many ships, too many soldiers. They turned our homeworld into molten slag. The tactical display updated as the enemy fleet drew closer. Long-range sensors were beginning to provide detailed scans of individual ships, and what they revealed was deeply troubling. The Hegemony vessels were built for war in a way that suggested they had been designed by a species that knew nothing but conquest. Their hulls were scarred by countless battles, their weapon arrays were massive, and their defensive systems showed clear signs of constant technological improvement.
How many humans survived?
Lysandra asked, dreading the answer. Maybe a few thousand scattered across different refugee camps and hidden colonies, Zaralyn replied.
Thomas and Sarah represent what's left of an entire species' children.
Most of the others are either dead or captured. The weight of that revelation settled over the command center like a shroud.
An entire species, reduced to refugees hiding in the dark corners of space.
And now those same destroyers had followed the last free humans directly to the Veiltheri homeworld. Incoming transmission from the lead hegemony vessel, the communications officer reported.
They're requesting to speak directly with the planetary authority.
Lysandra straightened her formal robes and moved to the central communication platform.
Put them through.
The holographic display shimmered and resolved into the image of a being that defied easy description. The creature appeared to be roughly humanoid in basic structure, but its skin had a metallic quality that seemed to shift and flow like liquid mercury. Its eyes were multiple clusters of sensor arrays that moved independently of each other, and, when it spoke, its voice carried undertones that suggested mechanical augmentation. "I am Coordinator Vexthal of the Hegemony 3rd Expansion Fleet," the being announced.
"You are harboring enemies of the hegemony.
Surrender them to us, along with any intelligence they may have shared with your species, and your world will be spared integration into our domain." The casual way it spoke of planetary conquest sent a surge of anger through Lysandra. She had ruled the Veiltheri Empire for over 60 years, had negotiated treaties with dozens of species, and had never once bowed to threats or ultimatums. "I am Queen Lysandra of the Veiltheri Empire," she replied with icy dignity. "The beings you refer to are members of my family and are under my personal protection. If you wish to discuss terms, you may request a formal diplomatic meeting through appropriate channels."
Coordinator Vexthal's sensor clusters focused on her with an intensity that was almost physical. "Your family? Interesting. The humans have contaminated your bloodline with their influence. This makes the situation more complex."
"Mother, don't," Zaralyn began, but Lysandra cut her off with a sharp gesture.
"There are no humans here," the Queen lied smoothly.
"Only my daughter and her adopted children, who are now under the full protection of the Veiltheri crown." The coordinator's image flickered slightly, suggesting rapid communication with other parts of the fleet. When it spoke again, its tone had shifted subtly.
"Our sensors detect human biometrics on your world. Our databases confirm that the vessel which landed earlier today carries the specific genetic signatures we have been pursuing.
You will surrender them within 1 standard hour, or we will take them by force." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the command center in tense silence.
Admiral Kethvar was already moving to update defensive positions, while technicians worked frantically to analyze the brief sensor data they had gathered from the enemy fleet.
1 hour, Lysandra mused.
"They're confident."
"They should be," Thomas said quietly.
"We've seen them do this before.
They always give exactly 1 hour, and they always follow through on their threats." Sarah moved closer to the tactical display, studying the enemy formation with the intense focus of someone far older than her apparent age.
"They're not planning an invasion," she observed.
"This is a smash and grab operation. They want to minimize their own casualties while extracting us and any information we might have shared."
"Then, they don't understand the Veiltheri," Admiral Kethvar said grimly.
"Your Majesty, our fleet is mobilizing, but we need time to coordinate with allied systems." "If we can delay them." "No," Zaralyn interrupted.
"Don't call for help. That's exactly what they want."
All eyes turned to the princess, who looked haggard under the command center's harsh lighting. "I've watched them do this to 6 different species over the past 20 years.
They always start with a small force, just enough to test local defenses.
If you call in allies, if you show them the full extent of your military capabilities, they'll withdraw and come back with their main fleet.
Then, instead of losing just Veilthera, you'll hand them intelligence about every military asset in this sector."
The tactical implications of that statement sent a chill through everyone present. The Veiltheri Empire maintained defense agreements with over 30 different species.
If the hegemony could use this attack to gather intelligence on all of them. So what do you suggest? Lysandra asked.
We run, Thomas said simply.
Sarah and I take our ship and leave.
They'll follow us, and your world will be safe. Absolutely not, the Queen replied with immediate firmness.
You're children. I won't let you face these monsters alone. We've been alone for 7 years, Sarah pointed out. We know how to hide, how to survive. It's what we do.
Lysandra looked at the two human children, seeing in their young faces a weariness that no beings their age should have to carry. They spoke of running and hiding as casually as other children might discuss games or lessons. The thought of sending them back into that life, of abandoning them to their pursuers, was unthinkable. There has to be another way, she insisted.
Admiral Kethvar cleared his throat. Your Majesty, there might be.
Our deep space monitoring stations have been tracking unusual energy readings in the outer system for the past few hours. It appears to be some kind of massive gravitational distortion, but our sensors can't determine its exact nature.
Show me, Lysandra commanded.
The tactical display shifted to show the outer reaches of the Veilferry system.
At the very edge of sensor range, something was definitely wrong with local spacetime.
The distortion appeared to be growing larger, and energy readings suggested technological activity on a scale that dwarfed anything in their experience.
When did this begin? The Queen asked. Approximately 8 hours ago, the Admiral replied.
About the same time the Princess's ship entered our system.
Thomas and Sarah exchanged a meaningful glance.
It's not connected to our arrival, Thomas said carefully.
But the timing might not be coincidental.
Before anyone could ask what he meant, new alarms began sounding throughout the command center. The sensor operator's voice carried barely controlled panic as she made her report.
Your Majesty, we're detecting massive energy buildups across the enemy fleet.
They appear to be charging weapons systems and preparing for atmospheric entry.
The tactical display updated to show hegemony ships moving into attack formation.
Their weapons were already beginning to glow with barely contained energy, and smaller assault craft were deploying from the larger vessels.
They're not waiting the full hour, Admiral Kethvar observed. They never do, Sarah said quietly. The hour is just to see if you'll panic and do something stupid.
Lysandra felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. In less than an hour, her world would be under attack by a force that had apparently never been defeated. Her daughter had returned after 23 years only to bring death and destruction with her. And, at the center of it all were two human children who seemed to know far more about warfare than any young beings should. Admiral, she commanded, deploy the fleet in defensive formation.
Full planetary shields, all orbital defense platforms online. If they want to fight, we'll give them one.
Mother, you don't understand, Zaralyn pleaded. Their ships are designed specifically to crack planetary defenses.
They've done this thousands of times before. You can't win a direct confrontation.
Then, we won't fight directly, Lysandra replied.
Thomas, Sarah, you know these enemies better than anyone.
If you were in command of our forces, how would you fight them? The two children looked at each other with that same two-adult communication they had displayed earlier. Finally, Thomas spoke. We wouldn't fight their ships at all, he said.
We'd fight their certainty. Explain.
Sarah stepped forward to the tactical display, her small hands manipulating the controls with surprising skill.
The hegemony has never lost because they follow the same pattern every time.
They arrive, demand surrender, and then apply overwhelming force when the surrender doesn't come. They're like a machine, efficient, predictable, and completely dependent on that predictability. So you disrupt the pattern, Thomas continued. You do something they've never seen before, something their databases and tactical programs aren't designed to handle.
Like what? Admiral Kethvar asked. The children's expressions grew thoughtful as they studied the enemy formation.
Like not being where they expect you to be when they arrive, Sarah said slowly.
Your Majesty, Thomas added, what do you know about gravitational distortion weapons?
The question seemed to come from nowhere, but Lysandra found herself thinking of the mysterious energy readings at the edge of their system.
We've studied theoretical applications, but the power requirements would be enormous.
Nothing short of a stellar mass object could generate the kind of distortion needed for practical weapons use.
What if you didn't need to generate it? Sarah asked. What if you just needed to redirect it?
Before anyone could ask what she meant, the sensor operator called out again. Your Majesty, the gravitational distortion at the edge of the system is moving.
It's heading directly toward us.
The tactical display updated to show the massive energy signature beginning to accelerate inward toward the planetary system. Whatever it was moving at a significant fraction of light speed and growing stronger as it approached.
That's impossible, Admiral Kethvar breathed.
Nothing that massive could move that fast without tearing itself apart. Thomas and Sarah were staring at the display with expressions that mixed hope and fear in equal measure.
It's not impossible, Thomas whispered. It's human. What? Lysandra demanded.
The distortion isn't natural, Sarah explained, her voice tight with emotion.
It's a ship.
The last ship of the human fleet, the one that's been running silent for 7 years while gathering strength for one final strike against the hegemony.
The Defiance, Thomas added.
Our parents are on that ship.
The revelation hit the command center like a shockwave. The mysterious distortion wasn't some random phenomenon, it was a human vessel, one apparently powerful enough to mask its presence for years and sophisticated enough to track other human survivors across the galaxy. How is that possible?
Lysandra asked. You said your homeworld was destroyed.
It was, Sarah confirmed.
But the Defiance wasn't on our homeworld when it happened. It was deep in hegemony space, gathering intelligence and looking for a way to strike back. When they heard about the final attack on Earth, they went dark.
We thought they were dead.
They've been hunting the hegemony for 7 years, Thomas continued, his voice filled with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Learning their weaknesses, mapping their supply lines, preparing for one last chance to make them pay. The tactical display continued to update as the massive ship drew closer. At this range, its true size was beginning to become apparent, and the numbers were staggering. The vessel was easily 50 kilometers long, its hull covered in what appeared to be adaptive armor that shifted and flowed like living metal. Most remarkably, the gravitational distortions it was generating seemed to be under precise control, creating a bubble of warped spacetime that made accurate sensor readings impossible.
Incoming transmission from the approaching vessel, the communications officer reported. Put it through, Lysandra commanded.
The holographic display flickered and resolved into the image of a human woman who appeared to be in her 40s. Her hair was streaked with premature gray, her face bore the lines of someone who had carried too much responsibility for too long, and her eyes held a hardness that spoke of terrible decisions made in desperate circumstances.
This is Admiral Rebecca Chun of the human resistance ship Defiance, the woman announced. I'm reading hegemony vessels in this system and human biometrics on the planetary surface. Sarah, Thomas, if you can hear this, we're coming.
Thomas and Sarah moved to the communication platform, their faces lighting up with joy and relief. Mom, they called out simultaneously.
The woman's hard expression softened as she saw them. Thank the stars you're alive. We've been tracking the hegemony fleet that's been pursuing you. Are you safe? For now, Thomas replied. But the hegemony is demanding our surrender.
The Veiltheri have offered us protection, but the Veiltheri?
Admiral Chen's expression grew thoughtful as she looked past the children to Queen Lysandra. Your Majesty, I presume.
I'm grateful for the protection you've offered my children, but I'm afraid your world is now in considerable danger. I'm beginning to understand that, Lysandra replied dryly.
Admiral, we could use any intelligence you can provide about enemy capabilities.
I can do better than that, Admiral Chen said with a grim smile. I can offer you 7 years of tactical analysis, detailed intelligence on hegemony command structure, and a plan to do something they've never experienced before.
Which is?
Lose a battle so badly that it destroys their entire strategic framework, Admiral Chen replied.
Your Majesty, how would you feel about helping us teach the hegemony what it means to pick a fight with the wrong species?
In the background of the transmission, alarms could be heard sounding aboard the Defiance. The massive human ship was clearly preparing for combat, its systems powering up after years of silent running.
The Hegemony fleet is beginning their attack run, Admiral Kethvar reported.
They'll be in weapons range in 15 minutes. Lysandra looked around the command center at her daughter who had finally come home, at the two human children who had become her unexpected grandchildren, at the approaching enemy fleet, and at the massive human warship that represented the last hope of a dead species. Admiral Chen, she said formally, the Veilthari Empire would be honored to fight alongside humanity.
What do you need from us? Trust, Admiral Chen replied immediately.
What I'm about to propose will look like madness, but it's the only way to break the hegemony's power in this sector.
Are you willing to risk everything on the tactical judgment of a species you've just met?
Lysandra felt a smile cross her features for the first time since the crisis began. Admiral, any species that can produce children like these has already earned my complete trust.
What do you have in mind?
As Admiral Chen began outlining her plan, the first hegemony ships entered weapons range and opened fire on the Veilthari orbital defenses. The battle for Veilthara had begun, but, for the first time in their 1,000-year expansion, the hegemony was about to face an enemy that had spent years learning how to turn their own strengths against them.
The first wave of hegemony plasma bolts struck Veilthara's orbital defense platforms with devastating precision.
The massive energy discharges lit up the planetary atmosphere in brilliant flashes of blue and white, while defensive shields strained under the assault. In the Royal Command Center, tactical displays showed the grim reality of the situation. The enemy's opening barrage had already disabled 2 defense platforms and severely damaged a third. Their targeting systems are incredibly sophisticated, Admiral Kethvar reported, his voice tight with concern. They're hitting our weak points with surgical precision, almost as if they know our defensive layouts in advance.
Admiral Rebecca Chen's image flickered slightly on the holographic display as the Defiance continued its approach toward the battle zone. They do know your layouts, she confirmed grimly. The hegemony has been studying galactic civilizations for centuries.
They've probably been gathering intelligence on your defenses for decades, waiting for an excuse to test them.
Queen Lysandra watched the tactical display with growing unease. The enemy fleet was performing exactly as her daughter had warned, with overwhelming efficiency and complete confidence.
Their ships moved in perfect coordination, their weapons fire was devastatingly accurate, and their assault patterns showed no signs of hesitation or uncertainty. Admiral Chen, she called to the human commander, your plan had better work, because at this rate we'll be completely overwhelmed within the hour.
The plan is already working, Chen replied. Look at their formation.
On the tactical display, the hegemony fleet had arranged itself in a classic siege formation, with heavy battleships forming a perimeter around the planet while smaller assault craft prepared for atmospheric entry. It was textbook military doctrine, efficient and proven effective across thousands of conquered worlds. They're following standard protocol exactly, Sarah observed from her position beside the main display. No deviations, no adaptations to local conditions, just pure doctrine.
Which is exactly what we need, Thomas added. Admiral Chen, are you detecting the gravitational fluctuations?
Confirmed, Chen's voice carried a note of satisfaction. The Defiance's drive system is generating exactly the resonance patterns we calculated.
The local spacetime distortion is building toward critical levels. Admiral Kethvar looked confused. I don't understand. What resonance patterns? What are you planning?
Before anyone could answer, new alerts began sounding throughout the command center. The sensor operator's voice carried barely controlled panic as she made her report. Your Majesty, we're detecting massive gravitational anomalies throughout the system.
It's affecting the orbital mechanics of our outer planets, and the stellar observation posts are reporting impossible readings. Queen Lysandra felt a chill of realization. Admiral Chen, what exactly is your ship doing to our system?
Something that should be impossible, Chen replied.
The Defiance isn't just a warship, Your Majesty.
It's a mobile gravitational research platform. For 7 years, we've been studying hegemony technology, trying to understand how they've managed to achieve faster-than-light travel without using jump gates or wormhole networks.
And what did you discover?
Lysandra asked, though she suspected the answer would be far beyond anything her people had imagined. They use gravity wells, Thomas explained, his young voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived with this knowledge for years. Their ships don't travel through space, they create controlled gravitational fields that pull space toward them.
It's how they can appear anywhere without warning, Sarah continued.
They don't need to follow established hyperspace routes or rely on existing jump gates. They just aim at where they want to go and bend reality until they get there. The implications of that revelation sent murmurs of shock through the command center. Faster-than-light travel without infrastructure was theoretical at best for most galactic civilizations. The idea that the hegemony had mastered practical application of gravitational manipulation explained their seemingly impossible military capabilities. But there's a weakness, Admiral Chen continued. Their gravity drive systems require incredibly precise calibration. If you can disrupt the local gravitational field with sufficient force, their ships become trapped in normal space. On the tactical display, the hegemony fleet continued its assault on Veiltheri defenses, unaware that they were flying directly into an elaborate trap. The Defiance had positioned itself at the edge of the system's gravitational influence, where its experimental drive systems could create maximum disruption without being detected.
The question is, Chen added, can your people evacuate the planet's population centers in the next 30 minutes? Evacuate? Admiral Kethvar looked stunned. Admiral, there are over 8 billion Veiltheri on this world.
Mass evacuation is impossible on that time frame. Not mass evacuation, Lysandra said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. You're planning to use our entire planetary mass as part of your gravitational weapon.
Essentially, yes, Chen confirmed.
The Defiance can generate a localized spacetime distortion, but, to trap an entire fleet of hegemony ships, we need something with the gravitational mass of a planet to anchor the effect. Princess Zaralyn moved to stand beside her mother, her expression grim.
You're talking about turning Veilthera into a massive gravitational anomaly. What happens to everyone on the surface?
The initial effect will be like a very mild earthquake, Thomas explained.
But the real danger comes after we trap the hegemony fleet.
Once they realize they can't escape, they'll probably try to destroy the planet rather than be captured.
Which is why we need those evacuation protocols, Sarah added.
Not for everyone, just for the major population centers that would be targeted first. Queen Lysandra looked around the command center, seeing the faces of her military advisors and technical staff. They were all looking to her for a decision that could save or doom their entire civilization. The choice was simple in its brutality: risk everything on an untested plan devised by a species she had just met, or watch the hegemony systematically dismantle their defenses and conquer their world. How long do we have before your plan goes into effect? She asked.
26 minutes, Admiral Chen replied. After that, the gravitational distortion will be irreversible.
Every ship in this system will be trapped here until the effect naturally dissipates.
And how long will that take? Approximately 40 years. The command center fell silent except for the constant background noise of battle updates and system alerts.
40 years. An entire generation trapped in a single star system, cut off from the rest of the galaxy, dependent entirely on whatever resources they could find locally.
There has to be another way, Admiral Kethvar protested.
Some alternative that doesn't risk our entire world.
There is, Thomas said quietly. Sarah and I leave with the hegemony fleet.
They get what they came for, your world is safe, and the Defiance retreats to continue the resistance somewhere else.
No, Lysandra said immediately. I won't abandon children to those monsters. Your Majesty, Sarah said gently, we're not really children. We haven't been children since the hegemony destroyed our homeworld.
We're soldiers in a war that's been going on for 7 years.
Admiral Chen's image nodded grimly.
Thomas and Sarah have been living as resistance operatives longer than most galactic species maintain active military service.
They understand the stakes better than anyone.
But they're still children, Zaralyn protested, her maternal instincts clearly in conflict with the tactical realities of the situation.
They shouldn't have to make these kinds of choices.
Mom, Thomas said, using the name that had clearly become natural for him over the years, we're the last free humans in the galaxy. If we don't fight now, if we don't take every chance to hurt the hegemony, then everyone who died on Earth died for nothing.
The tactical display updated to show the hegemony fleet beginning to move into position for planetary bombardment.
Their assault craft were already entering the atmosphere, and energy readings suggested they were preparing to deploy ground forces in major population centers.
Decision time, Your Majesty, Admiral Chen announced.
I need to know now whether to proceed with the gravitational trap. Queen Lysandra looked at the tactical display, then at her daughter and the two human children who had somehow become her family in the space of a few hours. The choice was impossible, but it was also clear. The hegemony had come to her world seeking children to use as weapons against their own people. The very fact that they would pursue two young beings across the galaxy spoke to a level of evil that could not be negotiated with or reasoned with. Proceed with your plan, Admiral, she commanded. And, may the ancestors forgive us all for what we're about to unleash.
Understood, Chen replied. All Veilthari ships should retreat to minimum safe distance from the planetary surface.
The gravitational effects will be significant.
Admiral Kethvar immediately began issuing orders to the fleet, while planetary evacuation protocols activated across Veilthara.
The Queen's decision had committed their entire civilization to a desperate gamble, but, as she watched the hegemony fleet continuing their relentless assault, she realized they had never really had any choice at all.
Admiral Chen, Lysandra called out, what happens to your ship when this gravitational trap activates?
The Defiance will be trapped along with everyone else, Chen replied matter-of-factly.
We've been running for 7 years, Your Majesty. It's time to stop running and start fighting.
On the tactical display, the massive human ship began to change course, moving from the edge of the system toward the heart of the battle.
As it drew closer, its true size became even more apparent.
The Defiance was larger than any ship in the Veilthari fleet, its hull covered in adaptive armor that seemed to shift and flow in response to incoming weapons fire.
Incoming transmission from the hegemony fleet, the communications officer reported. It's directed at the human vessel. Put it through, Lysandra commanded.
Coordinator Vexthal's image appeared on the display, its metallic features twisted into what might have been confusion or anger.
Human vessel, you will halt your approach immediately. Your species has been scheduled for extinction. Your continued existence violates hegemony authority. Admiral Chen's response was immediate and uncompromising. Coordinator Vexthal, this is Admiral Rebecca Chun of the Human Resistance.
On behalf of the billions of humans you murdered, on behalf of the children you've hunted across the galaxy, and on behalf of every species that will fall to your expansion if we don't stop you here, go to hell. The transmission from the Defiance cut off abruptly, leaving Coordinator Vexthal's image flickering with what appeared to be genuine surprise. In over 1,000 years of conquest, the hegemony had apparently never encountered such direct defiance from a supposedly extinct species. Analysis of human vessel indicates impossible energy readings, Vexthal announced, apparently speaking to its own fleet. Gravitational distortions suggest advanced spacetime manipulation capabilities. Priority target designation, maximum threat level. The hegemony fleet immediately began to reposition, with over half their ships turning to face the approaching Defiance. Energy weapons began charging to maximum power, while assault craft broke off their planetary attack runs to focus on the new threat. They're taking the bait, Thomas observed with satisfaction. The hegemony can't resist a direct challenge to their authority. Especially from a species they thought they'd exterminated, Sarah added. Their entire command structure is built around the idea that they're unstoppable. The first exchange of fire between the Defiance and the hegemony fleet lit up the entire star system. The human ship's weapons were unlike anything in galactic databases. They appeared to fire concentrated gravitational pulses that twisted space itself around their targets. When the pulses struck hegemony vessels, the ships didn't just take damage, they were compressed and distorted by forces that warped their very structure. But the hegemony response was equally devastating. Hundreds of plasma bolts converged on the Defiance, overwhelming its defensive systems and scoring direct hits along its massive hull. The human ship shuddered under the assault but continued its approach, its adaptive armor already beginning to repair the damage. 15 minutes to gravitational resonance, Admiral Chen announced over the battle communications. All ships prepare for spacetime distortion effects. Queen Lysandra watched the battle unfold with a mixture of fascination and horror. The Defiance was clearly outgunned by the entire hegemony fleet, but it was also demonstrating capabilities that defied conventional understanding of space warfare. The human ship moved through enemy fire patterns with impossible grace, its gravitational drive systems allowing it to make course changes that should have torn it apart under normal physics. "They're fighting like they know something we don't," Admiral Kethvar observed. "They do," Zaralyn replied quietly. "They know they're about to die." Before anyone could ask what she meant, the sensor operator called out in alarm. "Your Majesty, I'm detecting massive energy buildups throughout the hegemony fleet. It looks like they're preparing some kind of coordinated attack." On the tactical display, every hegemony ship simultaneously began charging their primary weapons to maximum power. Energy readings suggested they were preparing to focus their entire fleet's firepower on a single target, presumably the Defiance. "They're going to try to vaporize the human ship before the gravitational trap activates," Thomas realized. "Will it work?" Lysandra asked. Admiral Chen's voice came through the battle communications, tight with concentration as she maneuvered her ship through the increasingly intense enemy fire. "Maybe. But it doesn't matter. Even if they destroy the Defiance, the gravitational resonance is already building. The trap will still activate." "But you'll be dead," Sarah protested, tears visible in her eyes. "Better to die fighting than live as their prisoners," Chen replied. "Sarah, Thomas, take care of each other. And remember, humans never give up." The hegemony fleet's coordinated strike began just as the gravitational distortion reached critical levels. Hundreds of energy beams converged on the Defiance while space itself began to warp and twist around the battle zone. Reality seemed to fold in on itself as two impossible forces collided, the combined firepower of the galaxy's most advanced military force against a gravitational anomaly that defied the laws of physics. In the command center of the royal palace, alarms screamed as the planet itself began to shake under the influence of the gravitational distortion. Queen Lysandra gripped the command platform as the very fabric of spacetime buckled around their world. "Gravitational resonance achieved," a technician reported over the chaos. "The trap is activating." On the tactical display, something unprecedented began to happen. The hegemony fleet's weapons simply stopped working. Energy beams that should have traveled at light speed instead curved back on themselves as space warped around them. Ships that tried to maneuver found their engines fighting against gravitational fields that pulled in directions that didn't exist. And, in the center of it all, the battered hulk of the Defiance continued to fight, its weapons still functioning even as reality collapsed around the battlefield. The hegemony had finally met a force they couldn't overcome through superior firepower, the determination of a species that had already lost everything and had nothing left to lose. The aftermath of the gravitational trap's activation left the Veiltheri system in a state of controlled chaos. Space itself seemed to ripple with visible distortions, creating aurora effects that painted the planet's sky in impossible colors. The hegemony fleet hung motionless in the void, their ships trapped in gravitational fields that made conventional movement impossible. On the tactical displays in the Royal Command Center, what had been a dynamic battle scene was now a frozen tableau of metal and energy suspended in warped spacetime. Queen Lysandra stood at the central command platform, her forearms moving across multiple control interfaces as she tried to process the flood of damage reports coming in from across her world. The gravitational effects had been more severe than anyone had anticipated. While the major population centers had been successfully evacuated before the trap's activation, the planetary infrastructure had taken significant damage. Preliminary reports from the surface, Admiral Kethvar announced, his voice showing the strain of the past hours. 17 cities show minor structural damage from gravitational shearing. The spaceports are offline due to equipment malfunction. And, we've lost contact with 3 orbital manufacturing stations, they appear to have been pulled into higher orbits by the distortion effects. Casualties? The Queen asked, dreading the answer. Surprisingly light. Fewer than 3,000 confirmed injuries, mostly from people who didn't reach shelter in time. The evacuation protocols worked better than we hoped. Princess Zaralyn moved to stand beside her mother, with Thomas and Sarah flanking her protectively. The two human children had barely spoken since the gravitational trap had activated, their attention focused entirely on the tactical display showing the fate of the Defiance. The massive human warship was still intact, but its condition was clearly critical. Hull breaches along its starboard side vented atmosphere and debris into space, while several weapon arrays showed signs of catastrophic damage. Most concerning of all, the ship's gravitational drive systems appeared to be offline, leaving it as trapped as the hegemony vessels they had snared.
Any word from Admiral Chen? Lysandra asked gently.
Thomas shook his head, his young face showing more grief than any child should have to bear.
The Defiance went silent right after the trap activated. Their communications array was destroyed in that last exchange with the hegemony fleet. But they're alive, Sarah added with desperate hope.
The ship's life support readings are still active.
We just can't talk to them.
The tactical display updated as long-range sensors continued to analyze the trapped fleet. The hegemony ships were in various states of damage, but none had been completely destroyed. Their advanced defensive systems had protected them from the worst effects of their own weapons being turned back on them by the gravitational distortion.
However, their condition was clearly deteriorating as they tried unsuccessfully to adapt to their new circumstances.
Incoming transmission from the hegemony flagship, the communications officer reported.
Coordinator Vexthal is requesting to speak with the planetary authority. Put it through, Lysandra commanded.
Vexthal's holographic image appeared on the central display, but the proud coordinator was clearly shaken by recent events.
Its metallic features showed signs of physical damage, and its multiple sensor clusters moved with erratic patterns that suggested confusion or distress. You have committed an act of unprecedented aggression against the hegemony, Vexthal announced, though its voice lacked its earlier authority.
The consequences of this action will extend far beyond your single world. The only aggression here was yours, Queen Lysandra replied coolly. You came to my system demanding the surrender of children. What did you expect?
Expected? We expected compliance. Submission.
The natural order of superior force imposing its will upon inferior civilizations.
What we did not expect was.
Vexthal paused, its sensor clusters focusing on something beyond the range of the transmission. What we did not expect was this level of tactical sophistication from species we had classified as primitive.
Primitive?
Thomas stepped forward to the communication platform, his young voice carrying cold anger.
You destroyed our entire world and, then, called us primitive? You hunted children across the galaxy for 7 years and called that sophisticated? Vexthal's attention focused on the human boy with an intensity that was almost physical. You are the human designated Thomas.
Our records indicate you possess advanced knowledge of hegemony technology and tactics. You will be transferred to our vessel for interrogation.
No, Sarah said simply, moving to stand beside Thomas. We're done running from you.
You misunderstand your situation, Vexthal replied.
The gravitational anomaly will eventually dissipate. When it does, the hegemony will resume its expansion.
Your resistance has merely delayed the inevitable.
Admiral Kefvar stepped forward, his military bearing evident even in the formal diplomatic setting.
Coordinator, your fleet is trapped here for approximately 40 years. During that time, you have no ability to communicate with your command structure or call for reinforcements.
I would suggest that your position is considerably weaker than you seem to believe. Temporary imprisonment, Vexthal dismissed.
The hegemony has existed for over 2,000 years. 40 years is merely a brief inconvenience. Unless we decide to make it permanent, Zarelin said quietly.
The comment sent a visible shudder through Vexthal's image. Impossible. The gravitational field cannot be sustained indefinitely.
Actually, it can, Thomas said with grim satisfaction.
The trap isn't powered by artificial systems.
It's a resonance effect between the planet's gravity well and the quantum fluctuations created by your own FTL drives.
As long as your ships remain in the field, they're actually helping to maintain it. You're trapped by your own technology, Sarah added.
The harder you try to escape, the stronger the field becomes.
Queen Lysandra watched the exchange with growing understanding.
The human children weren't just refugees who had accidentally led an enemy to her world. They were strategists who had spent years planning this exact scenario, waiting for the right moment to turn the hegemony's own power against them. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked quietly.
7 years, Thomas replied.
"Ever since the Defiance went dark and we realized that a direct military confrontation was impossible. We needed to find a way to trap a significant portion of their fleet somewhere they couldn't call for help."
"But why here?" Admiral Cathvar asked.
"Why risk the Veilthari homeworld?" "Because we needed allies with advanced gravitational technology and the moral courage to fight an enemy they couldn't defeat through conventional means," Sarah explained.
"Your people have both."
Vexthal's image flickered with what appeared to be increased agitation.
"You orchestrated this encounter. The human ship did not arrive by coincidence."
"The Defiance has been tracking your pursuit fleet for months," Thomas confirmed.
"We led you here deliberately, knowing that the Veilthari would never surrender children to monsters like you."
The implications of that statement settled over the command center like a heavy weight. The humans had essentially gambled the fate of an entire world on their assessment of Veilthari character. They had bet everything on the belief that an alien species they had never met would choose to fight rather than simply hand over 2 refugee children.
"You couldn't have known we would help," Lysandra protested.
"Actually, we did know," Zaralyn said softly. "Because I told them about you, about our people, about the way you raised me to believe that protecting the innocent was worth any sacrifice." The Queen looked at her daughter with new understanding. "You've been in contact with them for years. The Defiance found me 12 years ago, when I was working with human refugee camps in the Outer Rim.
I've been helping coordinate their intelligence gathering ever since." Admiral Cathvar's expression showed his shock. "Your Highness, that means you've been operating as a covert agent for a foreign power."
"I've been helping the last survivors of a genocide find a way to fight back," Zaralyn replied firmly. "When I saw what the hegemony was capable of, when I watched them systematically exterminate entire species for the crime of existing, I knew that someone had to stand against them."
"Even if it meant risking your homeworld," the Admiral pressed.
"Especially if it meant risking my homeworld," she replied.
"Because if we don't stop them here, they'll eventually come for Veilthara anyway. The hegemony doesn't negotiate or coexist.
They conquer or they destroy.
There's no middle ground."
On the tactical display, the trapped hegemony fleet was beginning to show signs of internal stress. Several ships were venting atmosphere as their hulls strained under the gravitational forces, while others appeared to be suffering system failures as their technology tried unsuccessfully to adapt to the impossible physics of their situation.
"They're breaking down," Thomas observed with clinical detachment.
"Their ships are designed for controlled gravitational fields, not chaotic ones. The longer they stay trapped, the more damage they'll take. Which gives us a window of opportunity," Queen Lysandra said thoughtfully.
"Coordinator Vexthal, I have a proposal for you."
The hegemony commander's sensor clusters focused on her with renewed attention. "We do not negotiate with inferior species." "Then, you'll die here," the Queen replied matter-of-factly. "Your ships are taking damage that will eventually prove fatal. Your crews are trapped with no hope of rescue.
And your empire doesn't even know where you are.
What do you propose?"
Vexthal asked, its voice noticeably less arrogant than before. "Information in exchange for survival.
You provide us with detailed intelligence about hegemony operations, command structures, and expansion plans. In return, we'll work to find a way to safely extract your crews before your ships suffer complete system failure."
"Unacceptable.
Hegemony security protocols forbid. Hegemony security protocols assume you have other options," Thomas interrupted.
"You don't.
Your empire will write off this entire fleet as lost.
They'll never even look for you." The truth of that statement was evident in Vexthal's reaction.
The coordinator's image flickered with what appeared to be genuine distress as it processed the implications of its situation.
"Even if we were to consider such an arrangement," Vexthal said carefully, "what guarantee could you provide that our crews would be treated according to civilized standards?"
"The same guarantee you offered when you demanded we surrender 2 children," Sarah said coldly.
"None.
However, Queen Lysandra interjected before the situation could escalate further. The Veilthari do not mistreat prisoners, regardless of the crimes they may have committed. Your crews would be given medical treatment, adequate living conditions, and the opportunity to contribute to our society through useful work. Slavery, Vexthal accused. Employment, the Queen corrected. With pay, benefits, and the possibility of eventual citizenship for those who prove trustworthy. The offer clearly caught the hegemony commander off guard. In their 1,000-year expansion, they had apparently never encountered a civilization that treated captured enemies with anything approaching compassion.
Why? Vexthal asked, genuine confusion evident in its voice. We came here to conquer your world. We would have enslaved your population and strip-mined your planet. Why would you offer mercy to your enemies? Because, Queen Lysandra said simply, we are not you. The communication ended as Vexthal cut the transmission, apparently needing time to process the unexpected offer. In the command center, the reality of their situation was beginning to sink in. They had successfully trapped the most powerful military force in the galaxy, but now they had to figure out what to do with them. Your Majesty, Admiral Kethwar said quietly, even if they accept your offer, we're talking about potentially thousands of prisoners of war. Our facilities aren't equipped for that kind of population. Then, we'll build new facilities, Lysandra replied. And, we'll use hegemony technology to do it. They brought the tools of conquest to our world, we'll turn those tools toward construction instead. Thomas and Sarah exchanged one of their meaningful glances before Thomas spoke. Your Majesty, there's something else you need to know about the hegemony. They're not just conquerors. They're also collectors. What do you mean? Every species they've encountered, they've preserved samples, Sarah explained. Genetic material, cultural artifacts, historical records. The hegemony fleet doesn't just carry weapons and soldiers. It carries the accumulated knowledge of 2,000 years of conquest. The implications of that revelation sent a shiver of excitement through the command center. If the trapped fleet contained the preserved heritage of destroyed civilizations, then they had captured something far more valuable than just military assets. Are you saying, the Queen asked carefully, that the hegemony ships contain the means to resurrect extinct species? Not resurrect, Thomas corrected. But restore. With the right technology and enough time, every species the hegemony has destroyed could be brought back. Including humanity. For the first time since the crisis began, Queen Lysandra allowed herself to smile. The hegemony had come to her world seeking to capture the last free humans. Instead, they had delivered the tools needed to restore an entire galaxy's worth of lost civilizations. The war was far from over, but, for the first time in 1,000 years, the galaxy had hope. 3 months had passed since the Battle of Veilthara, and the royal palace had been transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history, the headquarters of the Liberation Alliance. What had begun as a desperate gambit to protect 2 human children had evolved into a coordinated resistance movement that spanned dozens of star systems. The crystalline spires that had once reflected the simple beauty of Veilthari architecture now pulsed with communication arrays connecting free worlds across the galaxy. Queen Lysandra stood in what had once been her private garden, now converted into a command center where representatives from 37 different species worked together to coordinate strikes against hegemony positions. The sight still amazed her. Beings who had never met before the crisis were now collaborating with an efficiency that suggested they had been allies for decades. The common enemy had created bonds that normal diplomacy might have taken centuries to forge. At the center of the garden stood a memorial that had been completed just the week before. Carved from a single piece of Veilthari crystal, it bore the names of every human who had died in the 7-year resistance against the hegemony. The list was heartbreakingly short, fewer than 50,000 names representing the remnants of a species that had once numbered in the billions. Thomas and Sarah stood before the memorial, as they did every morning at precisely the same time. They were no longer the frightened refugee children who had arrived on Veilthara 3 months earlier. The crisis had accelerated their maturation in ways that even their harsh upbringing had not achieved. They now served as official liaisons between the human survivors and the Alliance Council, their unique knowledge of both human culture and hegemony tactics making them invaluable strategic assets.
The morning intelligence briefings are ready, Thomas announced as he approached the Queen's position.
Admiral Chen sends her regards from the Defiance. The massive human warship had been fully repaired using a combination of Veilthari technology and salvaged hegemony systems. More importantly, its crew had been reunited with the children they had fought so hard to protect. The reunion between Admiral Chen and her adopted children had been one of the few purely joyful moments in the otherwise grim process of organizing a galactic resistance. How is the fleet integration progressing?
Lysandra asked as they walked toward the main command center.
Better than anyone hoped, Sarah replied. The hegemony ship designs are actually quite adaptable once you remove their control systems.
We've been able to retrofit 17 of their vessels with Alliance crews, and the captured database has provided tactical information on over 200 different hegemony installations. The integration of captured enemy technology had been one of the most surprising aspects of the resistance effort. The hegemony's obsession with efficiency had led them to create ship designs that could be operated by any sufficiently advanced species. More importantly, their practice of preserving conquered civilizations had filled their databases with technological innovations from across the galaxy.
Your Majesty, Admiral Kefvar called from the Central Command Platform. We're receiving reports from the Kepler Liberation Fleet. They've successfully taken 3 more hegemony supply stations in the Outer Rim. The tactical display updated to show new territories marked in Alliance blue rather than hegemony red. The color change represented more than just military victories, it meant entire populations that were no longer under the threat of extinction or enslavement.
Princess Zaralyn approached from the diplomatic section of the command center, carrying a data tablet filled with the day's correspondence. Her role had evolved from Lost Princess to Chief Coordinator of Alliance Diplomacy, and she had thrown herself into the work with an energy that spoke of years of suppressed frustration finally finding a constructive outlet.
The Altarian Council has formally agreed to join the Alliance, she announced.
That brings our total membership to 42 species, representing over 300 inhabited systems.
And the hegemony's response, the Queen asked.
Predictable, Thomas said with grim satisfaction. They're withdrawing from forward positions and consolidating their forces around core systems.
For the first time in their expansion, they're being forced to defend rather than attack. The strategic shift had been one of the most significant developments since the formation of the Alliance. For over 1,000 years, the hegemony had maintained their dominance through constant expansion, using the resources of conquered worlds to fuel further conquest. The Alliance's coordinated strikes had disrupted that pattern, forcing the hegemony to commit ships and troops to defensive positions that generated no new resources. However, Sarah added with concern, our intelligence suggests they're building something new in their core systems. Coordinator Vexthal has been surprisingly helpful with general information, but it refuses to discuss anything related to what it calls final protocols.
The mention of their unlikely prisoner brought a mix of frustration and grudging respect to the Queen's expression. Vexthal had proven to be exactly what it claimed, a military coordinator with extensive tactical knowledge but limited access to strategic planning. The hegemony's compartmentalized command structure had protected them from intelligence leaks, but it also meant their middle-level commanders knew surprisingly little about their empire's ultimate goals.
Speaking of our guest, Zaralyn said, it's been requesting another meeting with you. Something about crucial information regarding Alliance survival.
Lysandra sighed.
Vexthal's requests for meetings had become increasingly frequent as the Alliance's military successes mounted.
The coordinator seemed genuinely disturbed by the effectiveness of the resistance, as if the very concept of successful opposition to hegemony authority challenged its fundamental understanding of reality.
Very well. Schedule the meeting for this afternoon.
And make sure Thomas and Sarah are present, they have a better understanding of hegemony psychology than any of our other analysts.
The command center's morning routine continued around them as reports flowed in from across the galaxy.
The Alliance had grown far beyond what anyone had imagined possible when the first desperate message had been sent to neighboring systems 3 months earlier. What had started as a plea for help with a local crisis had become a rallying cry for every species that had ever feared hegemony expansion. Your Majesty, called out the communications officer, priority transmission coming in from the Defiance.
Admiral Chen says it's urgent.
The main display flickered and resolved into Admiral Chen's image. The human commander looked tired but determined, her face bearing the lines.